On the 13th of August, DeepSeek dropped a piece of software on GitHub for free and barely said a word about it. 4 days later, 135,000 people had started. 8,800 had already made their own copy to build on. Projects spend 5 years chasing numbers like that. This did it over a long weekend. And it isn't an AI, it's the thing that drives one. The part that reads your files, runs your commands, and does the actual work while you sit there. That's the part everyone's been paying for. DeepSeek just posted it. So did DeepSeek Harness just change AI forever? DeepSeek Harness is a standalone local program that installs onto your own computer with a single command, not a language model or a chatbot. And while running a terminal command usually feels like you're about to deal with some miserable text-only utility from 20 years ago, this one skips the terminal entirely and spins up a full graphical web page served strictly from your own machine. It sits right at 127.0.0.1 on port 3080, which is basically just the local address a computer uses to talk to itself. Because it runs entirely locally, the typical modern SaaS experience is completely stripped out. There's no login screen to get through, there's no usage dashboard telling you how many credits you have left, and there's absolutely no tech company standing in the middle of your work. Nothing leaves your machine unless you specifically configure it to point outward to an external provider, which means you just own the environment, and it runs quietly in the background like any ordinary desktop program. DeepSeek pushed this out on August 13th, 2026, and they shipped it under an open license. That means anyone can read the underlying code, rewrite the parts they don't like, and package up their own highly customized version of the tool to ship out, all without asking anyone for permission. You're getting the exact software that normally drives an enterprise AI, and you're running it entirely for free on the laptop sitting on your desk. All of which leaves one very obvious question completely unanswered. If this framework is the exact piece of the stack that every other company charges developers to use, why would DeepSeek spend the money to build it just to give it away? An AI model on its own only produces text. It cannot open a single file on your laptop, run a terminal command, or check to see if the script it just wrote actually works. The harness is the engine that sits between that text generator and your computer, translating the words the AI spits out into executed work on your machine. It opens your codebase, runs the necessary commands, reads whatever errors come back, and then hands that context back to the AI so it can decide what to fix next. It keeps that loop going entirely on its own, without needing you to sit there prompting it over and over again like a human clipboard. That gap between generating text and executing work on a real machine is the entire product developers are buying. Every paid coding assistant a developer subscribes to right now is a polished harness wrapped around somebody else's AI doing that exact translation job. So when DeepSeek dropped theirs for free, VentureBeat filed it on day one as a direct open source rival to exactly those paid tools. And they put the free software in the exact same launch story as the new paid model DeepSeek released alongside it, noting the higher prices on the API side. They know the harness is the part people pay for, so they gave away the exact piece of software developers are used to renting. If the harness is what people have been buying all this time, what makes a free one any different from the paid ones? The difference between this and the paid versions you might already be renting sits entirely in how the project is built. Underneath the hood, it relies on a kernel called Cordis, which treats the brain of the AI as just another removable part, rather than something permanently welded to the chassis. If you read the project's own documentation, the core pitch is quite literally that everything is a plugin. And they really do mean everything. The specific piece that talks to the AI is a plugin, and so is the list of jobs it is allowed to execute. The record of what it just did, the sandbox it works inside, and the underlying loop itself are all just independent modules that snap together. That architecture produces the exact promise everybody actually downloaded it for. Because the brain is just another removable piece, you can go into a settings file and change a single address. You hit save, and suddenly the exact same tool starts using a completely different company's AI. You keep your existing local workflows without touching anything else, and you are never locked to a single supplier again. That freedom to swap providers is why people immediately started arguing that the real power in AI has stopped being the model itself. The advantage has moved entirely to the software wrapped around it. It's also exactly why reports from the first 4 days after the August 13th launch showed 135,000 stars. Another 8,800 developers took their own copy in the days immediately after the launch, making it one of the fastest adoption runs GitHub has seen for a developer tool. Because people building with AI know exactly how valuable that kind of control is. The promise looks flawless on paper, and the idea of never paying another subscription is hard to beat. But that just leaves the question of whether that simple one-line model swap actually holds up once people start running it on their own machines. So on August 13th, 2026, the exact day this launched, somebody did exactly what the pitch promised and pointed the harness at a different company's AI. Almost immediately, a report went up on GitHub showing that every single time the AI tried to actually do something, the job came back rejected as an unknown tool. The tool could still hold a perfectly normal conversation with you, which is great if you just want a buddy to vent to, but it could not complete a single piece of actual work. The deeper reason this happens is that the big AI companies each write their messages slightly differently, and none of it is written down as one shared standard. That means somebody has to handwrite a translator for every one of them, which leaves you entirely at the mercy of whoever wrote that specific bridge. In this case, when a piece of information has not changed, some servers send it over as an explicit empty value, rather than just leaving it out. DeepSeek's translator looks at that empty value and assumes it means literally nothing, which is a bold philosophical stance for a piece of routing software. As a result, it drops the name and the reference number of the job the AI just asked for, right before handing it over to the harness. Without a name, the harness has no idea what plugin it is supposed to run, so it just rejects the request. The part of the report that really stings is that the specific piece of code at fault is named right there in the thread, and it is DeepSeek's own plugin. The exact package that the entire model swap depends on was the thing dropping the ball, which leaves you with an AI that talks beautifully and does absolutely nothing. And it forces the question of whether DeepSeek was just being careless on day one, or if translating between these companies is a wall that nobody has actually figured out how to climb. To figure out if DeepSeek was just being careless, you have to look at whether anyone else gets this right, because there are other open source frameworks trying to give you this exact same swappable setup. Take CodeWhale, which is a rival framework that tackles the problem by not even pretending it has it solved. Instead of magically abstracting the differences away, their codebase carries a separate internal setting called wire, just to track whose message style a connection is speaking. They name the combinations outright inside the project, including an explicit DeepSeek-Anthropic pairing, because the framework's code needs to know that the two ends of the pipe talk differently. You're basically acting as a couples therapist for two corporate servers that refuse to learn each other's love languages. And somebody still has to manually write down who is who in the code before they will even say hello. And that is the honest state of the art right now, because Point It Anywhere AI isn't some universal standard where you just swap a key and walk away. It's something a developer configures by hand, everywhere, on every single tool that offers it. So DeepSeek didn't fail at something routine here. They ran straight into the exact same structural wall that nobody else has figured out how to make automatic, and they just happened to do it in public, 9 days ago, with the whole internet watching them trip over it. So if every framework hits this exact same wall and requires this exact same manual handholding, why did a reported 135,000 people star this specific one in its first 4 days? So why would a company give away the exact piece of software that everyone else charges a subscription for? Well, the answer starts to make sense when you look at the calendar. Because on the exact same day DeepSeek put the free harness on GitHub, they also pushed their brand new paid model onto the API with higher prices. And even that launch price didn't last the week, because a few days later on a Sunday afternoon in the middle of the launch week, the company dropped flat pricing for that model entirely and moved to peak and off-peak rates. Reviewers who read the new rates against the old ones called it exactly what it was, which is a price rise, not a discount, whatever the launch framing said. So the local tool you install on your laptop costs $0, but the intelligence that runs inside it is what you actually buy by the token, and that specific part just got dearer. Which makes the open source promise to let you point the harness at any other provider easily the most expensive sentence in the README, because it's the one feature that actively costs DeepSeek money every single time it works. When a developer changes that config file and wires up a rival model instead, they immediately stop buying DeepSeek's compute. The meter just stops running, which means the swap promise stops looking like a simple gift and starts looking like a claim with a very real motive sitting behind it, since the money only flows when you stick to the default settings. If the plan is to sell you their AI, how well does it really run somebody else's? The answer is that it struggles, but the trouble is not actually confined to the edge where it meets a rival. 2 days after launch, a report found that installing almost any add-on written by somebody outside the project broke every single job the agent tried to do. And the report names the exact outside tools that trigger the fault, like a browser extension published as @anwet/dsh-browser, and a remote connection tool published as @linsin666/dsh-ssh. These are not obscure niche plugins that nobody uses, because driving a web browser and reaching out to talk to another machine are exactly the two things a developer installs an agent to do, which makes the loss immediate and concrete. And this spells out a very real, practical cost for anyone trying to build with it, because the add-on system is the entire reason to choose a plugin-based harness at all. If the architecture falls over the moment you try to extend it with an outside tool, the main advantage you downloaded it for is gone. And this time, the failure is a hard crash, not just a polite rejection, throwing a fatal error that says it cannot read properties of undefined. The root cause of that crash is a core shared package called DeepSeek AI/DSH tools that everything in the framework leans on. Each outside add-on brings along its own copy of that package, so the copy the add-on is holding is not the copy the harness is holding, leaving you with two identical copies in memory that completely refuse to recognize each other, treating each other with the exact hostility of estranged cousins at a family reunion. The maintainers said this was a problem in the platform itself, not in anybody's add-on, which is the more damaging of the two answers. So the damage is not confined to the seam where it meets another company, because the failure lives deep in the plugin system that the entire pitch rests on, and it clearly does not need a rival's AI to appear. But if the platform itself faults when you install an outside tool, you have to ask how many of these there are, and who exactly is going to fix them. Then on August 16, another report dropped into the discussion pile, logging that jobs were failing with an entirely empty tool name, and it was not the only one of its kind, which basically means the AI was trying to trigger a command and just forgetting to say which one. That makes 3 distinct structural faults reported inside 4 days, and every single one of them sits squarely in the only piece of the harness that actually has to work for the software to be worth installing on your machine. Now, normally when an open source repository faceplants this hard, the standard deal is that anybody who finds a fault just writes the repair themselves and sends it back, and the crowd ends up patching the thing way faster than the parent company ever could. But the developer who filed that very first day 1 bug report also pointed out a detail they found in the project's contributing guide, which states that outside repairs are simply not being accepted. So in the days immediately after the 13 August launch, 8,800 people took their own forked copy of this codebase, and you have to assume at least a few of them have solved these exact issues locally. But those fixes have absolutely nowhere to go home to. The answer to who patches this platform is DeepSeek, whenever DeepSeek decides to, which is exactly the same dynamic as any proprietary product you pay for, except because it costs $0, there is absolutely nobody for you to ring. Which means the word open did less work here than everyone assumed when they downloaded it, and that closed loop decides whether any of this improves or if it stays broken. So what is this thing actually good for today? So the answer to whether DeepSeek Harness just changed AI forever is a frustrating yes, because the part that used to be the product is now a free program you can run on your own machine. And that shift is not nothing, because 135,000 people wanting it inside 4 days proved developers want to stop renting that software and finally own it themselves. But what definitely did not change is the promise everybody actually showed up for, because 9 days of reports prove that pointing an agent at a different company's AI is still something a person sets up entirely by hand. That reality is true on this tool, and it is true on every rival framework that attempts the exact same swap. If you look closely at the version that spread across the internet, you will find it clearly labeled as a developer preview, with breaking change warnings attached, which is both a completely fair defense from the maintainers and the root of the whole problem, because the hype simply moved much faster than the software was built to go. So if you are sitting there wondering what this thing is actually good for today, the call is straightforward. You should run it against DeepSeek's own AI, because in that native setup, it is a good, free program that serves a local web interface directly from 127.0.0.1. It works, and it costs you nothing to run the software, which gives you a real coding assistant without a monthly subscription. But you should definitely not try to put another company's AI behind it in anything that actually matters to your workflow. The structure is just too brittle right now to trust with your production files, so that swap is not worth the headache. Keep it native and wait to try the modular plugins until the project starts accepting outside repairs and has shipped a release it no longer calls a preview. Anyways, that's all folks.